Thank you, Ze'ev. Before we open this up to the panel for their comments, I just wanted to go back to something that you said in the beginning of your presentation to us. And I wanted to say that I think if you would have come across a secular humanistic Jewish community when you relocated to New York, that none of the questions that were asked of your family at the conservative synagogue would have been asked. And I think that if Lisa came in to check us out, as she did the second temple where you did end up, that she would have felt just as at home there as maybe she'll feel where you've chosen. And also, there are ways that your children could be given the same message that you're given, that no, all Jews don't fast on Yom Kippur, and there have always been all different ways to be Jewish. And you're not a bad Jew. You're a secular, humanistic Jew. Anyone on the panel?
Our fellow journalist David Brooks wrote a column in the Atlantic Monthly 6 or so months ago, to which both Sherwin and I responded, though I don't think our letters were ever printed. But among other things, he said the reason so many Americans came to support George W. Bush after 9/11 is that they believe, and I think this is a quotation, that the Judeo-Christian vision of American democracy is the desirable millennial vision for the world. In light of what you've said, how do you respond to Brooks?
Is this on?
No, but this is.
Well, if Brooks is saying that America should try to replicate its culture, political culture, in the Middle East, I think that that's a lost cause. Although I was and remain a great supporter of the war in Iraq, it was not to bring democracy to Iraq, which I think is a vast improbability, if not less than that. It was simply to remove, I hope, the first of a number of difficult, radical regimes in an era when regimes have the capacity, financially and otherwise, to achieve really awful ways of working in the world. And I'm not talking about weapons of mass destruction. I know that there are many Americans, and I guess they range from, let's say, the Jerry Boykin model of people who, onward Christian soldiers, kind of fundamentalists, to right-wing Wilsonians who want to impose something on the Arab world. I don't. On the other hand, I know that there are a lot of Jews who are very uncomfortable with being in an alliance, de facto or otherwise, with born-again Christians and right-wing Republicans. And perhaps because I lived for so long away, and I mean, I have as an Israeli, I have a great aversion to Orthodox political parties and to theocrats, but I don't feel it, with the same intensity here. Perhaps because I've been much less involved in the argument here. I don't feel it with the same intensity that my Jewish colleagues, many of my left-wing or liberal, let's say, Jewish colleagues feel it. I don't have that antipathy. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but if I have, good.
Here, I think I just turned it off.
Hello. Hi, Ze'ev. I have a question for you about your use and seeming embrace of the term Judeo-Christian. And I don't want to sound like a rabid right-winger, which is far from what I am. But I have always, as a sociologist of religion, hated that term because, to be honest, to me it glosses together Judaism and Christianity, and it blatantly ignores 2,000 years at least of, well, it can't be more, 2,000 years of Christian persecution of Jews. And so the term makes me squirm. I'm wondering how you...
Well, I guess I'm looking at this pretty much in political and security terms. When it comes to the jihad, if you're the Christians and I'm the Jews, you know, I'm with her. Put me down with America. Put my hyphen next to America. And if that means Judeo and Christian, good. I don't look at it in theological terms or historical terms or sociological terms. I mean, clearly there are all kinds of Christians and there are all kinds of Christianities and there are all kinds of Jews and all kinds of Judaisms, and those are issues that are best left, I think, to people who focus their attention there. But for my feeling, you know, somebody said last night in one of the readings about, I think about Shabbat, that they said from one Shabbat to the next, I'm always somewhere in the middle, and that's a nice, secure place to be. And in Hebrew, you say Makom Tov Be'emtza, a good place in the middle. And I like the hyphen between Judeo and Christian, as long as there are 57 or more than 57 countries in the world who would like to do to me what they did to Danny Pearl, or do to more Jews what they're doing to Jews now and around the world.
Go on. Please.
Oh, and let me just say one other thing, okay? Because that, culturally speaking, I also like Judeo-Christian. And I can tell you that in Israel, for example, I once got in a lot of trouble with the chief rabbinate for having a big party on Sylvester, which is New Year's, and we had CNN, you know, the rabbis had said that year, no parties, so we invited CNN, and we had a huge party for New Year's Eve. Now, you could say that's the Christian part of the Judeo-Christian ethic. But over time in Israel, I became far more relaxed about, you know, expecting the Judeo part of the culture, maybe because I identified so much in the Hebrew language and so much in the territory of Israel and so little in other things. And I think that, at least in my case, speaking as somebody who grew up in Michigan, I mean, I was far more culturally influenced by Smokey Robinson than I was influenced by Rabbi Adler. And I would venture to say that most of the people here were. So, now I'm finished. Okay.
Ze'ev, I spend a lot of time talking to non-Jewish people, and sometimes I lecture to them, and once after a lecture somebody came up to me and they said, you know, my problem with Jews is that they want all the advantages of America, but their primary agenda is the Jews. So I sometimes feel the Jews are using America for their own agenda. And if I listen to you. And I could say the world, but whatever. What you said is, I don't mind Judeo-Christian, it's a strategy. If it brings me Christian allies, that's terrific. My primary agenda is the survival of the Jewish people. That's my primary agenda if I'm living in America, if I'm living in England, wherever I'm living in the world. And what I think is good for the Jewish agenda is primary. Now, one of the great accusations of the anti-Semite is that how Jews think? That for them they have a fundamental alienation from the Gentile world. And in fact, they will use the Gentile world when it's convenient for them. But they have no fundamental affection for it. There's no such thing as the American agenda. What is in the best interest of America? Listening to you, because your response to September the 11th, what I heard, and that's why you're maybe most comfortable surrounded by Jewish people, all right? For you, your primary agenda is the Jewish agenda. Do you want to respond to that? Because obviously that's an expression of, and talking about your connection to the Gentile world, that's an expression of some kind of fundamental alienation.
I would say, first of all, I mean, it's true that I see things refracted through a Jewish light. And if we're talking about the survival of the Jewish people as an abstract concept, I think that it's probably a good thing that there are Jews who see things abstract, you know, through a Jewish prism. I don't think, I mean, my experience with American Jews is that most of them, or a good many of them, and all of you are equally expert in this or more expert than I am, but my experience is that the vast majority of them are more American than they are Jewish. And I think that, and I've always assumed that in a crisis, for example, if there were one between America and Israel, the vast majority of American Jews would support the American position. And I think that we saw some of that during the Carter administration. And fair enough, fair enough. In the current, you know, climate, it's not so much that I want, as a Jew, to use America, but that it seems to me that, and this, of course, is the accusation, that the Jews have stirred up this war for their own purposes and are using the United States. That's what Matatir said at the Islamic summit, or implied. And that's what you'll hear everywhere in the Arab world. I don't think that's right. I'm not sure if the Arabs, and I say Arabs, and I mean also many Muslim societies, hate the Jews because we remind them of America, or they hate America because America reminds them of the Jews. I'm not sure about that. But I'm happy in this particular clash between civilizations, or between ways of looking at the world, I'm happy to be on the American side. I wouldn't want to be on the Iranian side. I wouldn't want to be on the Saudi side, objectively speaking. And also from, and morally speaking, but also practically speaking. One of the things that you know, I have no doubt that Israel as a Jewish society is prepared and able to defend itself. I also have no doubt what the awful price to Israel and to the rest of the world would be if it's called upon to defend itself alone. And that price will include not just Jewish survival in Israel and other places, but survival period for many parts of the planet. So if I'm looking at things, you know, and I concede to you that I'm a confused person in this situation. I'm married to a Gentile. My children have a Gentile mother. I live in a country which is not a Jewish country. In my own country, in Israel, I am anti-religious and not inclined to see things in religious terms. And here I find myself confronting issues that I hadn't thought of. And you said I'm more comfortable in a Jewish audience, and the truth is, as I said before, I think I'm more comfortable in a way, you know, I would be more comfortable with an audience of people who were from Lafayette, Louisiana, and who were members of the, you know, Knights of Columbus or some such thing as that, at least on this political level.
But you would talk to them differently.
I don't know. Well, I would talk to them differently because
You would tell them that it's good for America. But you were being very open about this.
Oh, I'm always open about it. I write a column about this twice a week, which is syndicated, and I don't make any secret of the fact of who I am and what my concerns are. They're different. My agenda, because my biography is different than Tom Friedman's biography. My biography is different. I'm an Israeli who is lucky enough to be able to write in the American press, and I make it clear to my readers, and I hope that they understand. I do think that the strategic interests of America and Israel at the moment are quite similar. And I'm certain that the enemies that America and Israel have are common enemies, and for fairly common reasons. But I don't make the argument that Paul Wolfowitz as an American could make, or Richard Pearl as an American could make, or on the other side, Charles Krauthammer could make, from pure, unadulterated American patriotism, because I don't have that luxury. I'm an Israeli citizen, and I'm not going to be able to see the world ever as only somebody who came from Pontiac, Michigan, nor do I care to.
What's wrong with being alienated? Most people are alienated one way or another. And as an external observer, like Ze'ev, I'm not an American citizen and I'm not a candidate for a green card. And I look at it as a friend of America. Therefore, I don't have to be anti-American. I mean, anti-Americanism in America is very popular. I don't have to be because I'm outside. But I see America as an outsider consisting of a large number of groupings of different kinds and sorts, and many of them, their primary preference are their own particular group. Now, if you call that alienation, fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. In modern society, most people are alienated. So I think that if you say that your primary concern is A and your secondary concern is B, they may change around very easily. They will still remain concerns, very important concerns. Now, when Ze'ev talks about the, we talked about this quite a lot before you came, radical Islam. 5 weeks ago, I quoted this to this audience. There was on one of the extremist websites, there was a statement that the immediate aim is to kill 4 million Americans, of whom 2 million should be children. It's the same website that said kill all Jews. And I think that, you see, there's an objective kind of a common concern. But it's not just a Judeo-Christian concern or a Judeo-whatever concern. It is a civilizational concern, because everything that humanity produced that it's worthwhile living for is being threatened, no less than it was threatened in the past by National Socialism or Soviet communism. It's the same kind of situation. We are, however, not, I think, and I disagree with you there, we are not in 1938. It's a different story. It's a different story not only because there's a state of Israel, as far as the Jewish concern is concerned, but also because there is a realization that this thing can be fought. And yet, in contradiction to what I just said, I love to contradict myself occasionally. It just shows that, you know, that people are complicated people. America hasn't got it. America has no idea. America is totally unaware that behind the terrorists there's an ideology, and they don't know how to fight it. Americans are doing exactly the wrong thing. They are trying to fight terrorists by hunting Al-Qaeda. Not that hunting Al-Qaeda is wrong, it's fine. But not to deal with the basic thing, namely recruiting Muslim allies, non-radical Muslim allies, to propagandize against radical Islam, and you need Muslims. And it doesn't work when Mr. Bush goes to a mosque. That doesn't make any change. What you need is something quite different. Now, I don't want to get into that, but when you say America understands, no, it doesn't.
Moriva Rabbi, next.
Well, I hate to create a front of the historians against poor Ze'ev here, but I have to subscribe to what Yuda just said. I'm actually teaching a course right now on the Holocaust, and you know, the 1938 analogy is not only wrong, but it's also dangerous, because it means that we think we're going to be fighting World War II. And frankly, I think if we're looking for an historical date to hinge, and of course one never finds analogies that actually work, but it's more like 1965, because even though Iraq is a desert, it's looking to me like Vietnam. And so, you know, I mean, for me, that was a formative experience. I spent many years in Israel as well. But, you know, it seems to me we've been here before. We've tried to reorganize the world, and we're right up against Arab nationalism, just as we were up against Vietnamese nationalism, and we thought it was something else, and we lost. And to me, it's actually more dangerous now that we've picked the wrong fight, and we may lose. I didn't think the fight against Al-Qaeda was the wrong fight. I thought that that was the right fight, and going into Afghanistan made sense to me. But then they went off on this adventure, which to me has little to do with radical Islam. The Saddam regime, which is a wicked regime and deserved to go into the dustbin of history, nevertheless was a secular regime and not an Islamic one. And so, you know, I see us actually creating a huge black hole there in which terrorism is going to flourish, rather than a solution to the problem of radical Islam, which I agree, it really is the issue we have to face. And, you know, generals always fight the last war, and that's what we're doing. We're fighting the last war. We're using tools and weapons that are very effective against conventional armies, but don't work against ideologies. So I think Yuda is absolutely right on this.
Well, I don't know. I understood you to say something somewhat different than that. And perhaps I'm wrong. Wasn't the analogy that you made, Yuda, with National Socialism and communism, not with Vietnam?
You're right.
Yeah. I think that we have a common front, actually, more or less, Yuda and I do, and not a historian's common front. But maybe you could say, I don't know how to characterize it. Let's just say the Bauer Chafets axis of evil. I know this isn't, you know, we're not here to discuss American foreign policy, and I apologize for taking us into that dark alley. There are people in the American left who think that this is Vietnam, that this is a quagmire and so forth, and they see this through the lens of their formative experience, which was also a formative experience of mine in our generation in Vietnam. And there are people who see it in a different way, and I'm among those who see it in a different way. I mean, it's an argument which is going to take place in this election and beyond this election and for many years to come. You know, I only want to say that I don't think, a very smart cop once said to me in New York, he says, the Israelis want to clean up Lebanon, I can't even get my kid to clean up his room. That was in the early 80s. And I think that's right. I don't think that it's Israel's job, America's job, to concern itself with the bad nature of this regime or that regime, or to do interior decoration in the Islamic world, or to put bloated dictators in the dustpan of history, or any such thing as that. I think it's the job of Western civilization to protect itself against an ideology which is armed and dangerous, and whose goals are very, very potentially grim as far as Western freedom is concerned. And especially, first and foremost, first on that list, the Jews. First on that list. And the one thing that I will say that sometimes depresses me here is the apathy that I find among Jews. A woman called me the other day. She's got a 14-year-old daughter. It's a Jewish woman. She has a 14-year-old daughter, and the daughter has decided that she wants to study Arabic because she feels, the woman lives in New Jersey, and so does the daughter. The daughter feels that it's important. She read that the translators at Guantanamo are unreliable, and she read that the FBI has got 1 million hours of tapes that it can't listen to because there are no good translators, and her country is at war. And she feels that she's at war and that she's vulnerable. She's a little 14-year-old girl, and she wants to do something. And I think that that's swell. I mean, I told her mom that it'll take her 10 years to learn Arabic well enough to listen to a conversation. But if she wants to invest the time, great. And I sometimes think that in segments of the American Jewish community, there's a kind of attitude of what me worry, you know, about all this, as though the Jews weren't, in a declarative way, in a specific way, and in a already bloody way, the primary targets of this murderous impulse coming out of the Middle East. And whether it's 1938, I only meant that in the sense of what it's now possible to say in public. What it's now possible to say in public. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, these things have changed. I don't think that as long as Israel exists, I agree with you that it's not 1938. It will never be 1938. But what Israel might have to do to prevent it from becoming 1939 could be things that will be very unpleasant for American Jews along with other people. I don't want to be more specific than that.
Ze'ev, as you know, I try to avoid debating American foreign policy with you, so I'll veer off into another area.
Thank you.
When you say that you're more comfortable in America among Gentiles than among Jews, do you think it has something to do with Gentiles in America reminding you more of Israelis who are in their own country essentially Gentiles?
Yes.
And therefore don't have the neurosis of the minority?
Yeah, I don't want to say neurosis because the Israelis are plenty neurotic. And especially my friends and our friends in Israel are, take a backseat to no one in neurosis. In fact, I have several friends, Israeli friends, who have made pathways into new realms of neurosis. But I think it's fair to say that over time I came to see myself, and one of the great liberating things, and it's not an original thought to me, about a Jew living in Israel is you get to be a Gentile. That's the whole great thing. You don't have to join the temple. You don't have to be a good citizen. You don't have to be a member of the community. You don't have to pay dues. You don't have to have the discussion about is Uri Zohar really Jewish or so and so half Jewish in West Clark and all this. It's a whole. You form a different way of looking at things. And I do appreciate that, and I do recognize it and sense it. I sense it also in many American Jews, but those are the ones who are less likely to be at an event like this, and more likely never to care at all about anything that has to do with being Jewish, and they're masters of the realm also.
I wanted to, is this on? Yeah, I want to return to a question actually that touches on what Sherwin asked, what Yehuda commented, what Ze'ev commented. And that's about the question of seeing, well, what is America's interest, what are Jewish interests? I think formulating that question in that way plays into an older kind of distinction that you can say this is an American interest. There is, I would argue, there's no such thing as an American interest or the American interest. And simply because those people who use that kind of language, that is in the government or in conservative groups or whatever groups want to pick out one other group for being unpatriotic, are simply taking their own particular interest and making it seem to be the universal interest. There is no such thing as universalism. It may be heresy to say that there. Universalism is what a majority group or a dominant group or a hegemonic group wants to say is universal. And convince other people that they're dissenting from what's universal. So that I think Yehuda was right on the mark when he said America's made up of many groups that have many interests. And these interests are different. And they will continually fight each other. And the problem is to fight off the assumption that there is some group in Washington or in Congress telling us what is the American interest or what American interests are. And a good example of this, if I could draw something from my own work, in the late 1870s, the liberals and Tories in Britain were divided about what their policy should be toward Turkey and the Balkans and what was known as the Eastern Question. And the liberals wanted Britain to take a very interventionist, anti-Turkish position because Christians were being massacred. And Disraeli said, it's not in Britain's interest. Britain's interest is keeping the Ottoman Empire from falling apart. That's for our strategic interest. The Tories backed him. The liberals said he was taking a Jewish policy because since Turkey was more accommodating to Jews in some other places at the time. And it was simply a rhetorical trick, a way of employing an anti-Semitic motif simply to push a Tory agenda, really. A liberal agenda against the Tories. There was nothing Jewish about Disraeli's policies. It was good Tory policy. But it was a way in which, in trying to take specifics and make them seem like there was a universal British policy that should be upheld all the time. So I don't think we should fall into that trap of talking about the Jewish interest, American interest, a conflict between the two. I'm not sure there's anything really that Americans agree on in one sense. Maybe a few things, but on everything there's differences. There's nothing wrong with pushing particularistic interests.
Agreed, and there's no one Jewish interest either. I mean, the interests of Chabad are not the same as the interests of the Birmingham Temple, clearly. And the interests of Paul Wellstone weren't the same as the interests of, are there any Jewish Republicans? I don't know. But I just want to say this. I mean, I understand the argument that there are no interests except what are temporary interests, or there are no universals. All of that is very true. And that's what made me a bit apprehensive on 9/11, because I know that. Because I know that it's possible for a society, a large society, to say to itself, oh, let's see, they're killing Jews, or the Jews are, this is all about the Jews, because it's not that the Jews are making this about themselves. This is, the Islamic world is making it about the Jews. Bin Laden doesn't have a Jewish speechwriter. Neither does Saddam Hussein, and neither do the Iranian mullahs, and neither does Hamas. These are authentic threats directed at Jews from the Islamic world, with some support in left-wing circles in Europe, and to a certain extent in the United States. That's what this is about. And it's clear to me that because the United States is not a Jewish country, and because Israel, for example, or even Jews, is not an American interest, there could be an administration like, for example, the Roosevelt administration, when it was confronted with the St. Louis, that said, send them back. It's not convenient for us to deal with this right now. And there could be an administration in this country that would say, like I think Kucinich, for example, might be tempted to say, it's or let's take it off Kucinich and take the French ambassador who said it's a shitty little country, Israel, or why should we fight with 1.3 billion Muslims when there's only 12 million Jews in the world, or 15 million Jews? It's simple arithmetic. All these things are possible to say. And who are we, any of us, to say that the Americans would be wrong to think that? Who is anybody to think that America is incapable of deciding to sacrifice you or your families? If that's the ultimate demand of 1 billion people on the planet, that could happen. But it's not going to happen because this country isn't built that way. And if there are certain things which you can say, even if you say there are no universals, I think you can come pretty close to saying that a sense that the Jews are part of the national fabric of this country and are fellow Americans is about as close as a universal gets here. And I, as an Israeli, wasn't maybe as sure of that as some of you probably instinctively were, and I was and have been made to feel more safe and more at home here since 9/11, because I see that there's a great intellectual resistance to the proposition that it's all that there is a separate agenda, that the Jews have a separate agenda. Jews have various agendas here, and they range from Tikkun magazine to Wolfowitz to all along the, but there isn't, I don't think, an essential feeling in this country that American Jews are different, or different enough to be sacrificed, or different enough to be allowed to be separated out, as you talked about yesterday with the separation.
I agree there are no universal interests, because universal interests include the interests of vile, fascist, totalitarian, and democratic and humanist, and therefore there is no such thing as a universal interest. But there are common denominators between the interests of all the countries that are democratic, that are post-Renaissance, post-Enlightenment, and there is a contrast between them and the interest of countries that are totalitarian and that are marrying religion with power, with hate and with genocide. And nobody can say that there is no universal interest if we are speaking only of part of the universe. our part. There are also ethical principles. Ethical principles means that if you have the power to help somebody who is being killed, you should help him. And the Israeli made the same mistake as Leon Blum made, but the non-intervention policy. And doesn't make any difference if he was accused because of anti-Semitic or other reasons. If somebody is being killed and you see it, and you can help him, you should help him. The whole discussion about Iraq having or not having mass murdering means is irrelevant for us, for Israelis, for those who were sitting for a month in shelters being bombed by missiles that fortunately did not make very much damage, but could kill the full population or part of the population of Israel. Those who discuss if it was important or not important to kill Saddam because he was trying to kill, to do a genocide, to do a Holocaust on Israel, because he was building an atom bomb. And only Israel stopped him from building